give it a few seconds. Okay, go ahead and start. Hi everybody, I'm Marlo, and thank you for being here today. Audience, thank you for being here and listening to yet another speech. I appreciate it. Say hello.
Hello.
Okay, so we can get started now. So you've all probably heard about the controversies about embryonic stem cell research. Excuse me, sir. Hello. It's good for you to be here. Thank you. You've probably heard about the embryonic stem cell research. Earlier this year, Barack Obama overturned George Bush's hold on studies using embryonic stem cells. We're very glad to hear that. Do you think that anybody we know or have known would benefit from embryonic stem cell research? Well, I'll give you one person in particular, Didi Sharon. She had MS, as you all know, and she suffered quite a bit through her time when she was hospitalized, and her family suffered also. She could benefit potentially from having her immune cells that attack her nervous system replaced with embryonic stem cells, and she would have had a much more quality of life in her life, and probably her family would certainly have appreciated that. But we're not going to talk about the treatments quite yet for using embryonic stem cells. What we're going to talk about today is that embryonic stem cell research isn't the evil that it was been portrayed as in the media and other areas, because it's not a right to life issue. It's required for some medical developments that we can't do with other stem cells, and also the IVF embryos that are left over would kind of go to waste. So first let's talk about what stem cells are. Embryonic stem cells are cells that can reproduce themselves. Adult stem cells do the same thing. The difference is embryonic stem cells are not differentiated yet, and that means that they can be turned into any kind of cell you want them to be if you have the right protocols. So for example, an embryonic stem cell could be skin tissue, it could be heart muscle tissue, it could be an eye tissue, anything. Whereas adult stem cells are already determined. An adult stem cell for skin is always going to make skin. So that's one of the benefits of embryonic stem cells. So we know what they are now, and let's get to the controversy, which is the big deal. Here's a picture of the development of an embryo after conception. This is the first day after the sperm and egg meet and their cytoplasm combines, and it's called pronuclear. On the third day, there's 6 to 8 actual cells. They aren't differentiated yet, they haven't turned into anything yet. And then here's the 5th day, there's about 200 cells, again, still not differentiated. Nothing in here can be, all of these cells can be turned into any type of cell that the laboratory would choose. So back to the controversy. Right to life groups, religious groups, some of them feel that life begins when the sperm and egg meet, which is here. Medical science believes it starts about 5 days after this, when the embryo implants into the uterus. That's when it starts producing hormones called HCG, which tell you that you're pregnant. It's about 10 days after, like I said, the fertilization happens. This, between 3 and 5 days, is when IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, that is when the embryos are frozen. In fact, I shouldn't use embryo, they're actually pre-embryonic. This is a blastocyte and this is a morula. They're not actually embryos even yet. That happens a couple of days later as well. That's when they're frozen for implantation, and that's when they're frozen, when they're used to do stem cell research at this stage right here. So we've talked about the controversy, and that pretty much covers it. It's when it begins. So you might say, well, why not just use adult stem cells? We certainly have them. Well, the problem is they're really hard to find. They're rare to find in tissues, and they're hard to grow in laboratories. Once they get them started growing, they grow for long periods of time, but they're really hard to get started. It's kind of like trying to find a car part, like a gasket made out of turtle leather from the Galapagos, or going down to the store where they're made from rubber. If it's easy to find, it's an embryonic stem cell. There's a lot of them. They're easy to grow in the laboratory, and they have particular uses in that they can study the growth of birth defects, for example. They happen during the growth when the cells are growing. So if you can watch where the birth defect occurs, it gives you a better chance to, cure a birth defect if you can see where the problem occurs. Also for cancer, we all have experience with people who've had cancer. Cancer is abnormal cell growth, and when cells grow abnormally, they grow at a rapid rate, just like stem cells. So it's another way for us to study things that, cancer cells, or it's another way to study cancer cells too. So now we know that embryonic stem cells are useful for particular types of disease studying. You might wonder, don't we already have some human embryonic stem cells? We do. About 400,000 that are in cryo environments that people have left over from their IVF treatments. These are people's potential children. They don't want to just give them away. They're really not good about that. They don't want someone else raising their children, but at the same time, they just don't want to throw them away. According to the Advanced Fertility Clinic of Chicago, about 300,000 of those cells will not even be viable for implantation. So they are just sitting in these cryo places, charging $600 a year to keep them there. So pretty much these parents have the opportunity to save a life by donating these embryos in a similar fashion to organ donation. So there's other embryonic stem cells that we have, and they're called stem cell lines that the National Institute of Health has. There's only 21 of these lines, which means there's not very much diversity. So the racial diversity and the ethnic diversity in the world can't really be accounted for in 21 stem cell lines. Also, there's a potential for them to have abnormal development. So that's why we need to have new stem cell lines created. Okay, so now you know the necessity for their use, and you want to know maybe, will these things actually work? Yes, there's several people who have actually received stem cells. A woman received a donor trachea. She can now take care of her 2 children without having breathing difficulty. And there's other cases, but we don't really have time to go into those right now. So today, I hope that I've shed some light on the controversy of stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research. And I hope that you can see that using embryonic stem cells to conduct medical research is a necessity. And finally, I hope that you realize creating new stem cell lines is not evil. It's a necessity, and I think possibly something that we could all, or at least generations after us, would find useful. And I also think, lastly, that the use of these embryonic stem cells would benefit the donor, then the recipient, and their families, even families like ours. So, thank you very much for being here today.
She's good at it.